fish is finished. It's so good. Crispy skin, really soft. Hi, today we're going to be barbecuing fish on real coals, and we are by a beautiful river, and I'm going to tell you a story, and it goes back to the time of Jesus, and it's a little bit after Jesus has died on the cross, and so it unpacks itself on a beach by the Sea of Tiberias. Not quite the Sea of Tiberias, but you'll have to use your imagination. So I want you to imagine the scene. The disciples are in the upper room of a house somewhere, and they'd been walking with Jesus for 3 years, and they'd been close with him, and within a few short days he'd been taken from them and beaten and had died in a horrific way on the cross. And so, to make it worse, people were beginning to hunt them down as well. Any followers of Jesus might be criminals. So they were hiding for their lives. So imagine the scene. They're sitting around, it's somber, it's quiet, no one's saying anything. And in the midst of this, Peter gets up and he says, "Oh, I've had enough, I'm going fishing. I'm a fisherman, that's what I do, I'm going fishing. Who's coming with me?" And the rest of the disciples get up and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's a great idea, let's go fishing. We can at least do that." So they go out in their boat onto the Sea of Tiberias and they fish all night and they catch nothing. And so as the sun's beginning to rise, they bring the boat slowly into the shore. And now, if they were depressed before, they're much worse now because, man, we can't even catch fish now. And as they get closer to the shore, they see a man walking on the beach. They don't recognize who he is. And he calls out to them and says, "Friends, have you caught any fish?" Now imagine that's the worst question to ask a bunch of fishermen who've just been out and caught nothing. But they graciously say, "No, thanks for asking, we've caught nothing." And he says, "Why don't you throw your net in the right side of the boat, the other side?" I would have told him to mind his own business, but for some reason they're pretty desperate and they throw the net in the other side of the boat, and within seconds it's full of fish, and pandemonium breaks out on the boat. And you can imagine the net's like dragging some of the men into the water, and the boat is kind of going sideways, and there's fish jumping out of the net into the boat, men screaming. It's a great scene. And in the midst of this, I like to think Jesus is on the beach watching his friends, panicking, trying to kind of hold on to this net, laughing his head off. And in the midst of this, John is looking at this guy on the beach, laughing at them and waving, and he says, "It's Jesus. It's Jesus, guys." And everyone stops and they're holding onto the net and they look. And sure enough, it's Jesus waving at them. And they don't quite know what to do, whether to let go of the net or to, shout back at Jesus. But Peter, he only has eyes for Jesus. He's forgotten about the fish, and he grabs his cloak, he wraps it around him, and he jumps straight out the boat. Whether he thinks he was going to walk on water, I don't know. I assume that the water was shallow enough. But he starts wading towards Jesus. Now go back a little bit in the story. Remember, Peter said, "Jesus, I will follow you unto death." And Jesus smiled at him and said, "Peter, before the cockle crows 3 times, you will deny knowing me." And Peter said, "I would never do that." But sure enough, when the time came, Peter denied Jesus. And I think that was on his mind. He'd been living with guilt and a sense of shame. Knowing that he couldn't make it right with Jesus, he let him down in that moment, turned his back, and suddenly Jesus is alive again. Peter, he wants to make it right with Jesus, so he's like wading through the water. And as he gets onto the beach, you can imagine him, he's probably rehearsing his speech to Jesus. "I'm so sorry I let you down, I wasn't there for you." And these words come out of Jesus' mouth. For me, they are eternal words that describe the nature and character of God. He doesn't say, "Oh, Peter, why did you do it? How could you, Peter?" What he says to Peter is, come and have breakfast with me. I think it's one of the most beautiful moments in the Bible where you're not really expecting that. Come and have breakfast with me, Peter. All that other stuff that you did, we'll talk about it later, but right now, fellowship, friendship. I think he gave him a look as well that probably said, it's going to be all right, my friend. And so there's a fire on the beach, some coals, some bread, and some fish cooking. Jesus was a chef. Now, I don't know what kind of fish that he was cooking, but I've got some beautiful sea bass that I've had filleted. I would imagine they were whole fish. And Jesus, being a bit of a chef, he's rubbed some virgin olive oil into the fish and he's seasoned it, and some nice ground pepper, and a little bit of dill. So just a little bit of a dry dill. You can use fresh dill. Bass is probably my favourite cut of fish, and it loves being barbecued. So there's fish already cooking on the barbecue. Jesus is sitting there, he's kind of prepared the scene. The fish is cooking away. And all the disciples come back onto the shore, and they're dragging this boat and the net, and there's 153 fish in this net. And they drag the fish onto the boat, onto the shore, and they're all screaming and hugging and high-fiving, and everyone's like so pleased to see Jesus again. And they have breakfast together on the fire. And they sit around and they're talking and catching up with one another and reclining into each other. And just, you can imagine this beautiful scene of friends together. And at the end of the breakfast, they're all relaxing and they've had this beautiful, beautiful barbecued fish. And it's gone quiet, and Jesus leans forward towards Peter. And he says, Peter, do you love me? And I think probably the rest of the group went a bit quiet because they kind of thought, oh, this is the moment. And Peter's like, oh, Lord, you know that I like you. I really like you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep, Peter. And then he leans into Peter again. He says, Peter, do you really love me? And Peter's like, Lord, you know that I really like you. I really like you. And Jesus says, take care of my lambs, Peter. And now the whole group's pretty quiet. And Peter's kind of probably thinking, what's going on here? And then suddenly, Jesus says for a third time, and remember Peter had denied him 3 times, so I think there might have been some kind of link. But Jesus changes his language at this point, and he realizes that maybe Peter's struggling with the love word. It's that kind of love that is deep and intimate, that will follow you throughout the world for the rest of your life. But maybe Peter can't cope with that. So Jesus tones it down slightly and he says, Peter, do you really like me? And at this point, Peter's pretty upset, and I think he maybe realizes what's going on. And he says, oh Lord, you know that I really love you. I really do, and it's deeper than friendship. I really do love you, and I want to follow you to the ends of the earth. And Jesus smiles at him and says, look after my sheep, Peter. And the Bible calls this story the restoration of Peter. And it's kind of like a second chance moment where they talk through this denial thing kind of indirectly. And Jesus is testing Peter. How serious are you about following me? I can forgive you and I will keep forgiving you. But how serious are you about following me to the ends of the earth, Peter? And in that moment, he renames him and says, I'm going to build my church on you, Peter. You're going to be the rock. I need to know that you're going to be the rock. And I want you to think about your own life. Think about where you're at now with God. How are you feeling about that? How close do you feel with him? Do Are you struggling? Are you thinking that you've maybe let him down, or you've kind of turned your back, turned away in some way? But Jesus wants to say to you right now, I really love you. Come and have breakfast with me. I want to be with you. I want to hang out with you. I want to eat food with you. This is an eternal message. This is God speaking. This is what he's like. We're always trying to work out, what's he like? What's his character like? He is forgiving. He's full of grace and mercy. He wants to restore us and give us a new name. He wants to take us by the hand and walk with us into life. So I want you to think about these eternal words, come and have breakfast with me. And when you're struggling, when you're kind of feeling far away, remember, Jesus' first point of call is to have breakfast with you. And the invitation is now, come and have bread and fish with me. And Jesus would have broken this bread together. It would have been a beautiful moment of coming together and enjoying fresh bread, a fresh aroma of bread. The fish is finished. And it's a beautiful meal. And I love to have barbecued fish. I don't know what you put on your barbecue, but stick a lovely bit of bass. This is sea bass. It loves to be barbecued. But remember, this is what God's like. He loves you. There's always a second chance with you. Thanks for being with me by the river, having breakfast with Jesus. Man, it's so good. Crispy skin, really soft. Perfectly cooked fish. I think the crew might beat me up if I eat all of this. It's too good.